Hey guys, before we begin tonight, get comfortable. Whether you're already tucked in or just winding down, this story isn't one you need to watch, just one you need to hear. Something quiet, unsettling and steady enough to carry you all the way to sleep. And if you enjoy stories that move slowly, go ahead and give this video a like. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and let me know what time it is where you're tuning in from. It's always a little eerie to see how far these stories travel, because tonight's story goes further than most. It begins with a building, one with too many rooms and too many keys, in a city that doesn't rest. A girl arrives, travelling alone. She checks in. Her luggage is left in the room. But by morning, she's gone. That's not the strange part. The strange part is what the camera sees and what it doesn't. A 4-minute video will go viral. Theories will multiply. Clues will seem too confusing to be real. And yet, they are. Every part of this story is real, documented, confirmed, still unsolved in the way that matters most. But we won't begin there, because that moment, the one everyone knows, only makes sense if you understand the place and the person. So tonight, we go back to where it started, before the footage, before the headlines, before the guesses. This isn't about what happened in the end, it's about what led to it. Part 1. The hotel with too many rooms. In the heart of downtown Los Angeles, a few blocks from where tourists circle like vultures, sits an older building. It doesn't stand out anymore. Not with all the new glass towers and LED billboards that pulse over the city at night. But it's still there. 12 stories high, built in 1924, with faded lettering near the roofline that once promised something grander. This is the Cecil Hotel. And from the moment it opened, the building couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Originally built as a business hotel for travelling salesmen and out-of-towners, the Cecil featured all the hallmarks of a glamorous property in the 1920s. A lavish lobby, polished brass elevators, coffered ceilings, marble columns and chandeliers. But just a few years after its doors opened, the country fell into the Great Depression. Business travellers stopped coming. Money dried up. The Cecil was still standing, but its purpose began to shift. Over the next few decades, the hotel's surroundings changed dramatically. As downtown Los Angeles struggled with poverty, substance use, and housing shortages, the Cecil's clientele changed too. The rooms became cheaper, guests stayed longer, and the building developed a quiet reputation. Not because it was loud, but because of the things that happened quietly behind its doors. By the mid-20th century, the area around the hotel had earned a name: Skid Row. What began as a term for temporary labour encampments had, by the 1970s, turned into something far more permanent. Tens of thousands of unhoused residents occupied the area in tents, shelters, and transitional housing. City services were stretched thin, and help rarely came quickly. Into this landscape sat the Cecil, once a symbol of opulence, now a building that stood mostly because no one cared enough to tear it down. The Cecil became part hotel, part long-term housing complex. It had traditional nightly guests, but also permanent residents, some living there on fixed income, others through government voucher programs. It had elevators that didn't always work, a lobby that was too quiet, stairwells that led to places guests were told not to explore. And over time, stories began to collect like dust. While it's true that some very public tragedies happened there, the building also became a magnet for whispers. Urban legends, crime headlines, and late-night cable specials made the Cecil a name you might recognize without knowing why. Part of that was deserved, but part of it too was because once a place gains a reputation, people start seeing ghosts in every shadow. In the late 2000s, the hotel attempted a rebrand. They painted the walls, updated a few rooms, and launched a new identity: Stay on Main. The idea was to market the lower floors to budget-conscious travellers and students, while the upper floors continued to serve longer-term tenants. 2 hotels in one, sharing the same building, elevators, plumbing, and rooftop. That distinction, however, was mostly cosmetic. If you booked a room at Stay on Main, you were still entering the Cecil, just with a new coat of paint. By 2013, the Cecil had become an odd mix of hostel and housing. One guest might be a backpacker from overseas. Another might be a retired tenant who hadn't left the building in years. You could walk past an open door and see a flat-screen TV, or a room that hadn't been updated since 1975. There were no security guards on every floor, no modern surveillance systems. Just front desk staff, metal keys, and a sign-in book. That January, a girl named Elisa Lamb booked a few nights. She'd never heard of the Cecil before. She booked through Stay on Maine's website, like many other young travellers. The price was low, the location was close to public transit, and the marketing seemed bright enough. She checked in. She was assigned a shared room. But after a day or two, something shifted. Other guests in the room requested to be moved. The hotel honoured their request and relocated Elisa to a room of her own. The staff wouldn't give many details, only that the change was due to behavioural issues and not a disciplinary matter. Nothing formal was filed. Elisa didn't seem troubled. She wasn't causing problems. She went out shopping, visited a local bookstore, and made small talk with the shop owner. She told him she was just passing through and looking for something to read on her next train ride. He later described her as friendly, a little quirky, but perfectly polite. She returned to the hotel that evening, carrying her purchases in a small tote bag. That was the last time anyone spoke with her in person. She didn't check out the next morning. Her room was still made up. Her suitcase was still there. But Elisa wasn't. The front desk called, no answer. Housekeeping entered the room. Still no sign. Her passport, wallet, laptop and phone charger were untouched. She had vanished. Not from a city, but from a building. From a room with a door that locked from the inside. And it wouldn't be until later, after days of silence, hours of footage review, and a search that stretched beyond the hotel's walls, that someone would realise just how strange this story would become. Part 2, A Girl in Transit. Before the world knew her name, Elisa Lamb was a young woman from British Columbia, growing up in a suburb just east of Vancouver. She was 21 years old when she travelled to Los Angeles. She was the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong, and she lived with her parents and younger sister in Burnaby, a quiet working-class area nestled between parks, highways and rows of townhouses. Her family owned a small restaurant. Their life was modest, private and close-knit. Elisa's life at a glance was unremarkable, but she had depth. She was introspective, often philosophical. She asked questions in her writing that most people didn't want to think about out loud. From a young age, she was drawn to literature, not the kind assigned in class, but older, denser works that wrestled with meaning, loneliness, and self-doubt. Sylvia Plath, Virginia Woolf, and Haruki Murakami were among her favourites. Her mind wasn't always a quiet place, but it was thoughtful, sharp, and very much alive. She enrolled at the University of British Columbia, but her academic journey wasn't linear. She began taking courses in literature and creative writing, but took semesters off and returned several times. Her time at school, like much of her life, was marked by a private battle with her own mental health. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, which she managed with therapy, medication, and, most of all, writing. Elisa wasn't shy about her experiences. On Tumblr, she ran a blog called Ether Fields, where she shared quotes, personal reflections, fashion photos, and short bursts of internal monologue. Her posts were poetic, often melancholic, sometimes humorous. She didn't overshare. She just didn't hide. She wrote about navigating young adulthood, feeling lost, feeling hopeful, and trying to make sense of emotions that didn't always obey logic. In one entry, she mentioned the weight of expectations, how she felt like she was always falling behind while others moved ahead. In another, she described the struggle of finding people who understood her, or who weren't afraid of silence. Elisa's voice was calm but restless. She wrote like someone observing the world from just a step outside of it. By late 2012, Elisa was ready for a break. Life at home felt routine. School was inconsistent. Her mental health was stable, but not perfect. She needed change. So she planned something big, a solo trip down the west coast of the United States, something she called her West Coast Tour. It wasn't extravagant. It was a backpacker's trip. Trains, hostels, bookstores and coffee shops. She wanted to visit San Diego, Los Angeles, Santa Cruz and San Francisco, then return home. The whole thing would take just under a month. A brief escape to clear her head. She updated her Tumblr along the way. The posts were scattered but consistent. A photo of a sign, a quote about motion, a few thoughts about loneliness, about meeting people, about being in unfamiliar places. It didn't read like a warning. It read like a journal, someone trying to capture a feeling before it faded. She called her parents every evening. This was part of the agreement. They were nervous about the solo trip, but Elisa had promised to stay in contact. She wasn't reckless, she was careful, organised, the kind of person who double-checked train times and kept her charger wrapped neatly in her bag. She arrived in Los Angeles on January 26th, 2013. By then, she had already been to San Diego, where she visited the zoo and posted about the weather being perfect if not for the wind. Her next planned stop after LA was Santa Cruz, but first, she had booked a short stay in a downtown hostel. Stay on Main. She didn't know what the building was. To Elisa, it looked like a safe, affordable place with clean sheets and modern branding. The online listing described it as a European-style hostel with private and shared rooms, located close to the subway, with internet access and continental breakfast. What it didn't mention, or at least not clearly, was that Stay on Main was a recent rebrand inside the Cecil Hotel. She checked in on January 28th and was placed in a shared room with other young women. The first night was uneventful. She kept to herself, was polite, and spent much of her time out walking the neighbourhood. But by the second night, something changed. Her roommates reported that Elisa was behaving strangely. Details are vague. Some reports say she was talking to herself. Others say she was uncomfortable to be around. Not dangerous, just unusual. As a precaution, the hotel moved her to a private room. There was no formal incident, no confrontation, just a quiet relocation. Elisa continued her routine. She left the hotel during the day. She posted online. She visited the Last Bookstore, a famous indie bookshop known for its maze-like shelves and artistic displays. There, she chatted with the owner, bought a few gifts, and told him she was heading north after Los Angeles. He later described her as friendly and talkative, someone excited about the journey. Back at the hotel, she was seen returning with a small bag and a slight smile. Nothing appeared wrong, and that night she called her parents, just like always. It was the last time they'd hear from her. The next morning, January 31st, Elisa was scheduled to check out. She didn't. Her room was untouched. Her clothes were still folded. Her bags were in place. Her laptop was where she left it. But Elisa was gone. The front desk tried to call her. No answer. Housekeeping checked the room. Nothing had been moved. Her belongings, including her passport, medications and wallet, were all left behind. She didn't leave the building. At least, not that anyone saw. Later that day, her parents contacted the Los Angeles Police Department. They hadn't heard from her and were immediately concerned. Officers visited the hotel, spoke with staff, and began a preliminary search. No one had seen Elisa. There was no sign of a struggle, no reports of loud noise, no obvious reason why a quiet guest would disappear overnight. Security footage was pulled. Rooms were checked, and for several days there was silence. No one knew where she had gone, how she left, or what might have happened between her last phone call and the next morning. It would take nearly 2 weeks before the public knew Elisa Lam's name, and even then, it wasn't because she was missing. It was because of a video, the last known recording of her, taken from the hotel elevator, captured just before she disappeared. But we'll get there soon. First, we'll look at how the search unfolded. Who got involved? What was found? And why, at first, the case seemed like one that might resolve quietly, before it spiraled into something else entirely. Part 3. A guest who didn't check out. January 31st, 2013. By noon, Elisa Lam had missed her checkout time at Stay on Main. It wasn't unusual for a guest to be late, but when hotel staff entered the room, they knew something wasn't right. The bed was still made, her luggage was untouched, her phone charger, toiletries and clothing were all neatly arranged. Nothing appeared missing. No signs of a quick departure, no spilled coffee, no packing in a rush. Her personal items hadn't been moved. Her passport and wallet were still there. But Elisa wasn't. They knocked, called. Nothing. At first, it might have seemed like an oversight. Maybe she'd gone out early for coffee, maybe to explore one last bookstore before catching a bus to Santa Cruz. But by the afternoon, when her parents reported that they hadn't heard from her the night before and hadn't received her usual check-in call, concern started to build quickly. Elisa's parents had a firm agreement with her while she was travelling. She would contact them every evening, just a short call or text, something to show she was safe. She had kept that promise every day of the trip, until now. So when her call didn't come, they acted immediately. They reported her missing to the Los Angeles Police Department, and within hours, officers arrived at the Cecil Hotel to begin the first of many searches. The initial response was standard. A missing persons report was filed. Officers canvassed the hotel, checking hallways, stairwells, lounges and common areas. Staff were interviewed. So were other guests. No one reported hearing anything unusual. She had simply vanished, without any noise, without anyone seeing her leave. The Cecil Hotel's layout made that situation even more confusing. The building was large, 15 floors total, including the lobby and rooftop. But its age and hybrid design created a maze of overlapping corridors and staircases. The Stay on Main hostel shared space with the long-term Cecil Hotel residents, meaning some doors were open to travellers, while others were restricted. There were service elevators and locked maintenance rooms, stairwells that led to forgotten sections of the building, and a rooftop that was supposed to be off-limits to guests. It wasn't a modern hotel. The keycard system was old-fashioned. Some areas didn't have working cameras. Security protocols were uneven, especially considering how many people moved through the building at any given time. Budget travellers, long-term tenants, staff, delivery workers, contractors, guests from all over the world. It wasn't easy to keep track of who was coming and going. By February 1st, the search had expanded. LAPD officers searched Elisa's room again, carefully combing through her belongings. There was no sign of struggle. Her laptop, later collected as evidence, didn't show anything immediately alarming. There were no written threats, no unusual browser activity, no indication she had planned to leave suddenly. Authorities checked nearby businesses, convenience stores, cafes and bus stops, asking for surveillance footage. But nothing definitive turned up. Elisa hadn't been seen exiting the building, and no one remembered her entering any nearby shops on January 31st. The hotel staff mentioned her visit to the last bookstore earlier in the week, but that was several days before she went missing. The owner confirmed she had stopped by, bought a few items, and chatted about her trip. Nothing unusual. In fact, he said she seemed completely at ease. That was the last public sighting. As the days passed, the LAPD began searching the Cecil room by room. Officers were granted access to individual rooms, some occupied, some vacant. Every door was opened, every hallway checked. Dogs were brought in to assist with the search. They sniffed stairwells, trash chutes and utility closets. But the building was old, and parts of it had been repurposed so many times that not even staff could fully explain what every key was for. Still, no trace of Elisa. One of the key limitations in the early days was a lack of urgency from the hotel itself. Because Elisa was an adult, and there was no immediate evidence of a crime, her case didn't prompt a lockdown or public alert from the building. Other guests came and went. Staff rotated through shifts. To many people in the building, it was business as usual. Behind the scenes, though, her parents were making increasingly desperate calls. The case was not yet public. At this point, it remained within police records and family circles. Officers didn't suspect foul play. There was no sign of forced entry. And without eyewitness accounts or clear evidence of a direction she had gone, there was little to pursue beyond continued searching. That changed on February 6th, when the LAPD held a press conference to announce that a young woman named Elisa Lam had gone missing from her hotel in Los Angeles. They shared her photo, a soft, close-up shot of her smiling in a grey hoodie, long, dark hair framing her face. She looked like a college student on any campus. The public's reaction was quiet at first. A few local outlets picked up the story. Flyers were posted. Tips came in, most of them vague or unhelpful. A few people thought they saw her near the downtown library. Another claimed to have seen her boarding a bus. None of it could be confirmed. Then came February 13th. 2 weeks after Elisa's disappearance, the LAPD released something they'd been holding back, something they had reviewed internally and debated whether to share at all. It was surveillance footage captured from inside one of the hotel's elevators. The timestamp read January 31st, the night she was supposed to check out. The clip was short, just over 3.5 minutes. In it, Elisa is seen entering the elevator. She presses multiple buttons in rapid succession. She appears to hesitate before peeking out into the hallway. She steps in, then back out. She hides in the corner. She moves her arms in strange, fluid gestures. And eventually, she walks away, out of frame. The elevator doors remain open the entire time. Then finally they close. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Elisa Lam, and it was about to become one of the most widely circulated surveillance videos in internet history. But before we dive into that footage and how the world reacted to it, we need to understand what makes a moment like this so captivating and so disorienting. Because from this point forward, the mystery wouldn't belong just to the police or to the family. It would belong to everyone. Part 4, 4 minutes of footage. By mid-February 2013, the search for Elisa Lam had stalled. The police had no new leads. The family had exhausted every possible contact. The hotel, a puzzle of stairwells, tenants, and maintenance closets, had been swept multiple times without result. No one had seen her. No one had heard anything. And with every passing day, the pressure to provide answers only grew heavier. That's when the LAPD decided to release the footage. They had been reviewing security tapes since the early stages of the investigation, pulling hours of footage from different angles. Most of it showed nothing helpful, just guests arriving, staff going about their routines, and quiet hallways with flickering lights. But there was one clip, short, strange, and entirely unresolved, that stuck out. It had been recorded by one of the elevator cameras. The timestamp read January 31st, around the evening hours. Elisa's last confirmed sighting. When the department posted it online, it was intended as a call for public help. Maybe someone would recognize her movements. Maybe someone had been on that floor. Maybe someone would see something the investigators had missed. Instead, the video went viral. The footage begins with Elisa stepping into the elevator. She's alone, wearing a red hoodie, dark shorts, and sandals. She leans forward and presses several buttons in succession. Not just one or two, but almost a whole column, like she's trying to select every floor. Then she steps back, and the elevator doors don't close. She waits. Still nothing. She looks out into the hallway. First one way, then the other. She ducks back inside, quickly pressing herself against the corner of the elevator, out of direct view. She hesitates, then steps out again. Her posture is slightly hunched, like she's watching for someone, or avoiding something. At one point, she moves her arms in wide, fluid gestures, almost as if she's talking to someone, though no one is visible in the frame. Then she leaves. She walks out of the elevator past the camera's range, and still, the doors don't close. For more than 20 seconds, the elevator remains open, then it shuts, opens, shuts again, and the clip ends. There is no sound, no clear context. Just a girl in an elevator, behaving in a way that doesn't make immediate sense, followed by an unnerving technical detail, a door that refuses to behave the way an elevator door should. Within hours of its release, the video began circulating on social media, news sites, and eventually international platforms. People were mesmerized. Reactions were immediate and intense. Some said it looked like she was being followed. Others thought she was hiding. A few claimed the video had been altered, slowed down, or edited. Entire comment sections filled with frame-by-frame analysis. The video was watched millions of times. People noticed small details, how she pressed the buttons, how she hesitated, how long the doors stayed open. They argued over body language, they speculated about her mental state, they created timelines, theories, and full-length video essays, all based on just under 4 minutes of silent footage. In those early days, online forums like Reddit and YouTube comment threads became unofficial investigation centers. Viewers mapped the hotel layout, compared elevator models, and shared theories ranging from mechanical malfunctions to elaborate criminal plots. Many of these users were not trained investigators. They were ordinary people, drawn in by a mystery that felt too strange to ignore. Because there were so many unanswered questions. Why didn't the elevator behave normally? Who was she talking to, if anyone? Why did she press all those buttons? Where did she go afterward? The footage created a kind of narrative vacuum, one that people rushed to fill with speculation. And in that process, Elisa stopped being a person to some of them. She became a story, a symbol, a character in a real-life thriller that was still unfolding. For the police, though, the video didn't provide any new leads. There were no visible threats, no physical altercations, no signs that anyone else had entered or exited the elevator during the clip. The hallway behind her appeared empty. The camera showed only a small portion of the floor. What happened before or after that window, they didn't know. But for the public, the clip was more than a clue. It was a mystery in motion, and that mystery took on a life of its own. True crime creators began uploading breakdowns. Popular forums labelled the case an unsolved internet legend. Even international news outlets picked up the story, often focusing on the video itself more than the missing person. It wasn't just about Elisa anymore. It was about what the footage suggested, or didn't. This kind of rapid attention can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it spread awareness. More people knew Elisa's name. More eyes were watching. Tips, even if inconsistent, began flowing in from all over. Her face was shared globally. Her family's appeals for information reached audiences far beyond Los Angeles. But on the other hand, it also meant the conversation shifted, from grounded concern to speculation for entertainment. People started combing through her online presence. Tumblr posts, Instagram photos, travel plans. They searched for hidden meanings, double meanings, signs that something was off. Some focused on her mental health, analysing her past writing. Others rejected that explanation entirely, insisting something external had happened. A few internet users even began accusing strangers, people who had stayed in the hotel, musicians who had once filmed videos there, guests who had posted selfies near downtown LA. The theories snowballed. The more mysterious it seemed, the harder it was to let go. The police stayed quiet. The investigation was still ongoing, and at this point there were no official updates to offer. Elisa's room remained sealed, her belongings were in evidence, and the search of the hotel, including all accessible areas, had already been conducted. Still, she hadn't been found, and as the days stretched into weeks, and the video climbed past 5, then 10 million views, the case no longer belonged only to the people investigating it. It belonged to the world watching it. In the next part, we'll explore how the internet's obsession with this mystery grew, and how the people trying to help began blurring the line between justice and intrusion. Because when a real person becomes the center of a viral mystery, sometimes the story grows bigger than the truth itself. Part 5. The Internet Takes Over. Once the elevator footage reached the public, the story of Elisa Lam stopped being a quiet local mystery. It became an internet phenomenon. Within days, the video was trending globally. It was reposted, clipped, remixed, and analysed from every angle. True crime forums lit up with discussion. YouTube channels produced frame-by-frame breakdowns. And soon, Elisa's story was no longer just a police case. It was a digital obsession. At first, the attention seemed helpful. People wanted to assist. They created timelines of Elisa's trip, pieced together maps of downtown Los Angeles, and catalogued everything known about the Cecil Hotel. Viewers from around the world shared potential tips. Some even tried contacting others who had stayed at the hotel around the same time, hoping for first-hand accounts. But as the days passed, the tone shifted. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, more personal. Viewers weren't just watching, they were inserting themselves into the narrative. Some referred to Elisa in familiar terms, as if they knew her. Others began to speculate about hidden meanings in her blog posts, or supposed patterns in the elevator buttons she pressed. The mystery had taken hold. And when a story feels personal, people stop waiting for facts. They start writing their own. Online sleuths began identifying anyone who had a connection, however loose, to the Cecil Hotel or its surroundings. One particular case involved a musician from Mexico who had stayed at the Cecil a year prior. His online persona was dark and theatrical, with horror-themed music videos and stylized performances. Someone found his posts, then others, then hundreds more. It didn't matter that he hadn't been in the United States during Elisa's trip. It didn't matter that his content was fiction, art, performance. The connection, in the minds of some, was enough. They labelled him suspicious, accused him of things he hadn't done. His inbox filled with threats. His videos were flooded with angry comments. He eventually deleted his content and disappeared from the internet for a time, overwhelmed by the backlash. This was the first major sign that something had gone too far. The internet wasn't just speculating anymore, it was accusing. Other amateur investigations tried to deconstruct Elisa's blog. Ether Fields, her Tumblr account, became a kind of public archive. Her writing, once personal, reflective, often poetic, was suddenly being picked apart by strangers looking for signs. Some posts were misread as warnings. Others were edited and reposted with dramatic music. A few users claimed she had left behind a digital trail that could solve everything, but in reality these were the thoughts of a 21-year-old student, someone who used writing as a way to process her emotions, who quoted books, made jokes, and sometimes vented into the void of the internet like millions of others her age. It was never meant to be dissected. And yet, in the online world, Elisa was no longer treated as a private person. She had become the protagonist of a mystery thousands of strangers felt responsible for solving. Her family, meanwhile, remained quiet. They had flown to Los Angeles after her disappearance, working closely with local authorities. But after the footage went viral, they began avoiding interviews. News outlets respected their request for privacy. and for the most part, they stayed out of the growing media storm, because the story had taken on a life of its own. Some of the most devoted online communities mapped out the entire floor plan of the Cecil Hotel, down to its stairwells, water tanks, and emergency exits. They debated the placement of cameras, the timing of the footage, and whether the video itself had been edited before release. One theory suggested the footage had been slowed down to create confusion. Another proposed that part of it had been removed entirely. Theories like these didn't come from malice. They came from frustration, from people who genuinely wanted to help but were working with incomplete information. Still, their theories became louder than the facts. No official statement from police could quiet them. When LAPD explained the investigation was ongoing, many online users claimed the truth was being hidden. When experts suggested the elevator doors remained open due to a door hold function triggered when the door open button was pressed and held, people rejected that explanation. They preferred the mystery. Because mystery gives people more to talk about. It creates space to fill in the blanks. And the truth, that someone may have simply been overwhelmed, confused, or unwell in unfamiliar surroundings, felt too ordinary, too uncomfortable, too anticlimactic. So the internet turned Elisa's story into something else. News outlets began covering the case more aggressively, but instead of focusing on the investigation, many chose to emphasize the strange details, the hotel's reputation, its proximity to Skid Row, and past tenants with criminal records. They showed slow pans of the building, added suspenseful music, and reused clips from the elevator video over and over again. It became a spectacle. The same footage Elisa's family had watched in fear was now playing in prime time, not as evidence, but as entertainment. This is the moment where her story crossed a line. No longer a missing person, not yet a case with resolution. Just a girl in a video, stuck on loop. By the third week of February, the LAPD had revisited their earlier searches of the Cecil. More staff had been interviewed. Maintenance workers were consulted. Every place that could be easily accessed by guests had already been checked. And yet, Elisa was still missing. So police expanded the search again, this time into less accessible parts of the building. On the morning of February 19th, something changed. Guests at the hotel began filing unusual complaints. They said the water pressure was inconsistent, that the colour was off, that the taste was strange. That same morning, a maintenance worker was sent to check the rooftop water tanks. What he found would end the search. But it would not end the questions. Not by a long shot. Part 6. The Rooftop Discovery. February 19th, 2013. The complaint started early in the morning. Guests at the Cecil Hotel began reporting something strange with the water. Some said the pressure had dropped. Others mentioned the colour. Slightly murky, off in a way they couldn't quite describe. A few noted a metallic taste. It wasn't the first time the building had issues. The plumbing was old, the pipes rattled. But this was different. So the front desk notified the maintenance team. One worker, familiar with the building's infrastructure, made his way to the roof. The Cecil's rooftop wasn't designed for guest access. There were no open lounges or garden terraces. It was industrial, bare concrete, HVAC units, and 4 large water tanks, each supplying water to different sections of the building. Access to the rooftop required a key and an alarm override, at least in theory. The worker climbed a ladder, made his way to one of the tanks and opened the hatch. Inside, he found something unexpected. He immediately notified hotel management, who then contacted the Los Angeles Fire Department. The news travelled quickly, first to police, then to Elisa's family, and by the end of the day, to the public. Elisa Lam had been found. She had been discovered in one of the rooftop water tanks. No one could explain how she had gotten there. The tanks were not easily accessible. Each one stood roughly 10 feet tall and was sealed with a heavy metal lid. The roof itself was protected by an alarm system. The access door, according to hotel staff, remained locked at all times, and yet somehow Elisa had ended up inside one of the tanks. The moment raised more questions than it answered. Was the hatch left open? Was the alarm disarmed? Had someone seen something and not realized it? Had anyone heard anything in the days before? Investigators re-entered the hotel that evening, this time with more urgency. They re-examined the stairwells, the fire escapes, the service routes. The rooftop alarm system was tested. It functioned, though, depending on the route taken, there were ways to reach the roof without triggering it. The elevator video, once just an eerie clue, was now treated with greater significance. It was believed to be the last known recording of Elisa before she disappeared, but even that clip left investigators with uncertainty. No one appeared behind her in the footage. No one followed her visibly into or out of the elevator. If someone else had been involved, they remained unseen. Still, no signs pointed directly to another person, and the building, for all its complications, hadn't provided any concrete answers. As news of the discovery broke, the internet's reaction was immediate and divided. Some were heartbroken, others frustrated. Many simply didn't believe the explanation could be that simple. How could someone enter a locked rooftop? How could she lift a lid that heavy? Why hadn't she been found earlier? And what did any of this have to do with the video? Theories reignited. New ones emerged. Some speculated that Elisa had been chased. Others proposed more complex ideas. Everything from building maintenance flaws to security loopholes. And then there were theories that abandoned logic entirely, trading evidence for folklore. Because of the hotel's history and the mystique around it, conspiracy theories exploded again. Some believed supernatural forces were involved. Others were convinced of a larger cover-up. The more mysterious the circumstances seemed, the more difficult it became for many to accept the official story. But behind the online noise, a quieter truth remained. A young woman had been found far from home, in a place she never should have been. Her family, who had waited nearly 3 weeks for any update, were now left with the impossible task of grieving in public, while strangers debated her final moments like they were clues in a game. That week, the Los Angeles coroner's office began its work. An examination was scheduled. Toxicology reports would follow. Investigators hoped to answer one central question: what had happened between the moment Elisa was last seen and the moment she was found? But even with science and timelines, the story remained incomplete. There were no clear signs of trauma, no broken locks, no surveillance footage that captured her climbing to the roof. Only questions, only theories. And for many, the uncertainty was too uncomfortable to leave alone. The Cecil Hotel was now at the center of a media storm. Reporters camped outside. Guests were questioned. Reviewers flooded the hotel's online listings. People posted videos of the lobby. Some tried to book the same room Elisa had stayed in. Others wandered the hallways with cameras chasing shadows. The building's reputation, already murky, now became global. It wasn't just a place with a past. It was the place where that video happened. The place where that girl stayed. The building that, for reasons no one could explain, had become the setting of a story the world couldn't stop watching. Soon, city officials demanded an inspection. Health and safety protocols were reviewed. The water tanks were tested, and Elisa's family, still in shock, filed a civil suit against the hotel, alleging negligence in allowing the rooftop to remain accessible and unsafe. But the case was still ongoing, and no official conclusion had been released. By the end of February, the public attention began to shift. Not because interest had faded, but because the internet had begun to recycle its own theories. The same 4 minutes of footage played on loop. The same screen grabs were analysed. And still, no one knew anything for certain. The elevator doors, the hand gestures, the rooftop tank. None of it felt explainable. None of it felt complete. And the longer the mystery lingered, the more Elisa became a symbol rather than a person. She had become the face of a question no one could fully answer. But behind the headlines, there was a quieter story, one of grief, confusion, and the limits of what even the most careful investigations can uncover. In the next part, we'll look at what came after, the official reports, the family's legal case, and the final statements released by those tasked with answering the questions everyone still asked. Because not every story is solved. Some are just closed. Part 7, the report and the lawsuit. In the weeks following Elisa Lam's discovery, much of the world waited for a final answer, something official, something that would explain what happened to a young woman found in a rooftop water tank. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office had taken over the case, with full access to the police investigation, building access logs, surveillance footage, and Elisa's medical history. The report would take time. Toxicology screenings can take weeks, sometimes longer, depending on backlogs and the condition of the samples. While the public speculated, authorities worked quietly. The results were released in June 2013, nearly 5 months after Elisa's disappearance. The official conclusion: accidental death. The cause was listed as drowning, with Elisa's mental health condition cited as a contributing factor. The toxicology report showed that Elisa had taken some of her prescribed medications consistent with her diagnosis, but may have missed certain doses or taken them inconsistently during the trip. No drugs or substances outside her prescription were found. No injuries were reported. There were no signs of trauma or force, no indication of a struggle, no evidence that another person had been involved. The report listed the manner of death as accidental, and the case was officially closed. But for many, that conclusion only deepened the mystery. The coroner's findings, though thorough, left open emotional questions that science couldn't answer. If Elisa had gone to the rooftop on her own, how had she gotten past the locked door or the alarm system? How had she accessed the tanks? And why? Hotel staff insisted the alarm on the rooftop door was active and would have sounded if opened. However, the building had other access points, including a fire escape ladder, which, while difficult to reach, may have been climbable. The tanks themselves, though large and sealed, had unsecured lids. The maintenance worker who discovered Elisa had simply lifted the hatch. Still, none of these facts sat comfortably with the public. Online, people continued to ask, if it was an accident, why did it feel so impossible? Elisa's family, meanwhile, had stayed largely out of the spotlight, but they were still present, quietly working with an attorney to investigate the hotel's liability. In September 2013, a wrongful death lawsuit was filed against the Cecil Hotel by the Lam family. The suit claimed that the building had failed to provide adequate safety measures, that guests should not have been able to access the roof, that the water tanks should have been locked or secured, and that a reasonable guest could have accidentally ended up in a dangerous location due to lax oversight. The hotel's legal team pushed back. They argued that Elisa had entered an area that was clearly restricted, that warning signs were posted, that roof access was not permitted to guests, and that the hotel could not be held responsible for actions it could not have reasonably foreseen or prevented. The case did not go to trial. In 2015, the court dismissed the lawsuit, ruling that Elisa's death had been a tragic accident, one that the hotel could not have reasonably predicted or prevented. The family, already carrying the weight of grief, chose not to appeal, and with that, the legal chapter of the case ended. But the public conversation didn't. Online, theories continued to circulate. Some insisted the autopsy report was incomplete. Others believed key information had been left out. A few refused to accept the ruling at all, convinced something had been missed or covered up. The elevator footage, still unexplained in many people's minds, became a kind of eternal question mark. Why did the elevator stay open? Why did she press so many buttons? Was someone else involved? To investigators, those questions have been explored and answered as best as possible, The elevator model had a door hold function, which may have been triggered by Elisa's button presses. Her behaviour, though unusual, was not impossible to explain, especially in the context of a fluctuating mental health condition and possible disorientation. But to others, those explanations felt unsatisfying. The footage had left too strong an impression, and sometimes impressions last longer than facts. Over time, the intensity of the internet's focus dimmed. Other stories emerged, other mysteries took the spotlight. But Elisa's case remained a kind of modern folklore, cited in documentaries, shared on late-night YouTube spirals, whispered about on forums. Not because it was unsolved in the legal sense, but because it felt unfinished. The viral nature of the elevator video made closure difficult. It wasn't just something people read about, it was something they saw, something they rewatched, something that entered the collective imagination, quietly, uncomfortably, and without permission. In the years since, her story has been adapted and reimagined in various forms. Some documentaries treat it respectfully, others lean into the drama, and in some cases, fictional shows have loosely borrowed elements of her story for their own eerie plot lines. This attention, well-meaning or not, has made it hard for many to separate the real Elisa from the version seen online. Because the real Elisa Lam was not just a case. She was a daughter, a sister, a student. She liked vintage clothes and books with complicated metaphors. She kept a blog, not to broadcast pain, but to sort it. She travelled alone because she wanted to grow, to find clarity, to get away from a place that sometimes felt too familiar. And she was never meant to become a mystery. In the final part of this story, we'll look at the broader impact of Elisa's case, what it changed, who it touched, and what it continues to teach us about the way we consume real stories about real people. Because mysteries don't always need answers. Sometimes they just need to be understood. Part 8, The Girl in the Elevator. Years have passed since Elisa Lam checked into the Cecil Hotel. The building itself has changed. It's been rebranded again. New management, new renovations, a new name. The Stay on Main branding is gone. But no matter what they call it, the story stays. The elevator remains in people's minds. Not because it holds the answer, but because it doesn't. For many, the moment Elisa stepped into that elevator became a symbol, a riddle, a scene stuck on repeat, begging to be solved. But the more time that passes, the more we're forced to ask, why do some stories linger when others fade? The answer might be in the footage itself. It's short, unsettling. It doesn't confirm anything. It just invites questions. And our minds don't like unanswered questions. They fill in the blanks. They build stories around silence. And the silence surrounding Elisa's final moments was louder than most. But it's also about timing. Elisa's case arrived at a specific moment in internet history, when social media was growing, when true crime was becoming entertainment, and when access to details made everyone feel like a detective. It wasn't just a mystery. It was an interactive mystery, one that anyone could try to solve from their bedroom, with a paused YouTube video and a theory. That kind of reach has power, but it also has consequences. In the aftermath of the case, Elisa's story became a cautionary tale, not about rooftop access or hotel design, but about the line between awareness and intrusion. Many of the people who followed the case were genuinely trying to help, but others got caught in the momentum of it all, sharing screenshots, making assumptions, and crafting narratives that made Elisa feel less like a person and more like a puzzle. Even now, her name is more associated with the footage than with her life. Search her online and you'll find reaction videos, ghost stories, dramatized reenactments. Less often, you'll find her blog, or her writing, or photos of her smiling with her sister. That's the part we lose when a real story becomes too big. We forget that it started with someone real. But maybe that's why her story stays with so many people, because we recognize something familiar in her. Elisa wasn't famous. She wasn't reckless or glamorous or extreme. She was thoughtful, curious, and trying, like most of us. She had her challenges, but she also had her hopes. And the way her story unfolded feels deeply personal, because it could have happened to someone we know, or someone we are, a person looking for something, space, growth, escape, and getting lost along the way. There are still debates online. Some people refuse to accept the official report. Some still think something was missed. But those who are closest to the case, the investigators, the staff, the family, have long since stepped away from the spotlight. And maybe that's what should happen now. Not because the story doesn't matter, but because the person does. Elisa Lam wanted to see the world. She wanted to write more, read more, meet people and feel the buzz of unfamiliar places. She didn't get to do those things in the way she hoped, but she left behind something people don't forget. She left behind a reminder that mysteries aren't always meant to be solved like puzzles. Sometimes they're meant to be witnessed, to be held with care, to be remembered not for how they ended, but for who they were about. So tonight, as you rest, maybe take a quiet moment for Elisa, not for the mystery, not for the video, just for her. If you've made it this far, you're either fast asleep or you're still wondering about the rooftop, about the elevator, about Elisa Lam. We may never know everything about what happened, but maybe the point was never to solve every detail. Maybe it was just to remember that behind every headline, there's someone real. If you're still with me, I'd love to know. What do you think really happened that night? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always comforting to see just how far this strange little firelight reaches. And if this kind of quiet, strange storytelling is something you'd like more of, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We dive into real stories like this every week. The forgotten, the bizarre, the unexplained. All told a little slower, a little softer, for minds that need to wander before they rest. Until next time, sleep well. And if you hear the elevator door stay open just a little too long, maybe don't get out.